everyone. Welcome to episode 53 of Dollar Dialogue. Today's episode is regarding Hong Kong, from British port to financial powerhouse, with Ling, Yu, Wang, or Sam for Sam. And today we are talking taking you to a city that never quite slows down. It's like a place where ferries glide past glass towers, where like the street markets sit steps away from investment banks, and from rooftop views in Central to the hustle of Sham Sui Po. So we are diving deep into the vibrant, high stakes world of Hong Kong. But today we won't just talk about GDP or growth rates. We'll also talk about the people who live in it, share their personal anecdotes, and how Hong Kong is economically and politically thriving. As you guys are aware of, it's one of the Asia's financial capital after like Singapore. So together we'll unpack how Hong Kong became a global trade titan, what sets it apart from neighbors, and what the future looks like for young adults trying to make it in one of the world's most dynamic and demanding cities. So today we have Sam. So Sam, is there anything that you would like to add to the introduction?
I'd just like to say thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here. Arif is such a talented individual, always taking time out of his very busy schedule to work on this podcast. And yeah, I'm excited to discuss and explore the economic landscape of my home city with you all today. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. So for our first segment, we'll talk about from port to powerhouse. Let's first rewind. So before the skyscrapers, before the financial sector, and before it became a global buzzword, what was Hong Kong? So back in the mid 1800s, Hong Kong started as a sleepy fishing village. Its natural deep water harbor made it a key outpost during British colonial expansion. But over the decades, something remarkable happened. It evolved into one of the world's most important trade and logistics centers. So by the 1970s and 80s, Hong Kong had become a manufacturing beast, churning out textiles, toys, and tech compounds. But as factories moved to mainland China, the city pivoted. Instead of collapsing, it sort of transformed, becoming a high-value hub for finance, logistics, and services. And together, and today, Hong Kong ranks among the world's top financial center, home to the busiest container ports and a stock exchange, which is valued relatively high compared to its neighbors, and also something that exchanges the bridge between the east and the west. So in 1841, historically speaking, that's when the British took control officially of the Hong Kong island, and that was during the first Opium War, if I'm not mistaken. And at the time, the population was under 10,000, but its deep natural harbor quickly made it a strategic trading post between China and the West. So by the early 20th century, Hong Kong's port became one of the busiest in the world. And after World War II, with waves of migrants fleeing instability in mainland China, the city's population surged from 600,000 in 1945 to 2.5 million by 1961. So that population boom fueled a labor-intensive industrial economy. But here's the wild part: in the 60s and 70s, as I mentioned before, Hong Kong became one of the original four Asian tigers, alongside South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. Manufacturing was king, but it was oversaturated. About 45% of its GDP came from industries like textiles, plastics, and electronics. But when China opened up in 1980s under Deng Xiaoping, Hong Kong did something few cities have ever pulled off in the history of the world. It pivoted. Factories moved across border to Shenzhen, and in their place, a service economy emerged. So by 2023, over 92% of Hong Kong's GDP came from services, especially finance, trade, and logistics. Its stock market is the sixth largest in the world by market capitalization, and it consistently ranks in the top three global financial centers index, alongside the New York Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange. So, with that information being said, is there anything else that you would like to add to the historical context of Hong Kong, Mr. Supreeth Nagella, Mr. Shahzaib Karim, or Sam? Mr. Supreet Nagella, I see that your hand is raised. Would you like to chime in?
Unfortunately, my internet is very bad, so not yet.
Mr. Shahzaib Karim, I see that your hand is raised. Would you like to chime in?
Yeah, sure. So, Arib, you gave a very good description. And I think, adding on to like diving into um like doing a deep dive into one of the most complex economic battlegrounds of the 21st century, which is Hong Kong, which I think Arib, you gave a very good description and a very good overview of the history. But I think just adding on to you, I'd say that back when the Britain took control of Hong Kong in 1842, it was primarily for its strategic port during the Opium Wars. But by the early 20th century, Hong Kong began morphing into a free market haven, and its laissez-faire policies, low taxes, and minimal government intervention made it more attractive to businesses who were fleeing the instability in mainland China, especially after 1949, I think. So it essentially just became a sort of capitalist outpost right next to a huge like communist giant, And I think that that paradox became its biggest economic advantage because later I think by the 1970s and 80s, Hong Kong was booming, and I think this was because of a few main factors such as manufacturing and export, banking and financing, and also real estate and services. So let's not forget that by 1997, I think, just before they hand over to China, Hong Kong had the seventh largest stock exchange in the world.
Mr. Supreeth Nagella, I see that your hand is raised.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to talk about the secret role of Hong Kong in financing China's nuclear program. Because during the Cold War, while Hong Kong was still under British rule, it played a covert and crucial role in funding the development of China's first atomic bomb. And this involves illegal financial networks, gold smuggling, and backdoor trade routes. So back then in the 1950s, China was under heavy embargoes. No western country would sell uranium, heavy machinery, or electronics needed for a nuclear program. But through shadowy networks of Chinese business elites based in Hong Kong, millions of dollars worth of gold and tech components were smuggled into China, often disguised as goods or laundered via casinos. These business elites were pro-communist, and even while operating under British colonial capitalism, they used Hong Kong's free market loopholes, regulations, and trade flexibility to buy banned goods from Europe, Japan, and even parts of Southeast Asia. So why does this matter? Because this reveals how Hong Kong's early role was sort of a financial gray zone, not just for trade, but also for strategic military development. This also shows how Hong Kong's free port status was exploited by in order to bypass global sanctions, a pattern that would repeat in different forms even today in China. For instance, when tariffs hit China during Trump's last tenure, China was able to transport goods through Vietnam directly to the US and save on those tariffs. But it also makes Hong Kong one of the most economically and geopolitically significant events in Cold War history, where a British colony helped an enemy communist state go nuclear.
Sam, I had a question for you. So, how would you say, as someone living in Hong Kong, have you experienced the British colonial legacy? And do you think Hong Kong has like sort of uh, like gone past that?
Um, Thank you, Arib, for the question. I think it's um pretty much impossible to kind of discuss Hong Kong's economy and society without, of course, first acknowledging its history, which is British colonial legacy, and how that legacy shapes the city today. Um, in terms of daily experience, as someone who has lived and studied and stayed in Hong Kong for pretty much my whole life, I think I've noticed obvious vestiges of like British colonial rule everywhere, from like not only the legal system, which is now rooted in common law, to the bilingual street signs on pretty much every street, the driving on the left rule and kind of the prevalence of English in the government, business, as well as education here in Hong Kong. And to add on to that, even the city's kind of iconic red post boxes and the Queen's Pier were direct colonial kind of like relics from the British colonial rule period. And I feel like these elements aren't just cosmetic, but they also kind of reflect how the city was organized for over 150 years and how that legacy has passed on to today. In terms to expand more on like the common law system, it was inherited from the British, and it is currently a cornerstone of its reputation as, you know, a global financial hub. So investors, both local and international, I think have long trusted, you know, Hong Kong's transparent system. So for example, Hong Kong is currently ranked as the world's like, one of the freest economies for almost 25 years. And that's largely because of its legal and, you know, regulatory environment, which is a direct result of British administration. But another question is if Hong Kong has truly gone past the colonial legacy. And I would say in some ways, yes, it has, because the city has, you know, over the years developed its own special and unique identity. Since the handover in, was it 1997 that you said? There have been efforts to kind of localize the government, you know, promote Chinese mainland language and culture, and, you know, integrate with the Greater Bay Area, which I believe we will discuss later. And however, like kind of the colonial legacy also persists in some ways, and sometimes it might, you know, come up as a source of tension. So from my perspective, many Hong Kongers see the rule of law, freedom of speech, and, you know, openness as positive colonial inheritance that's, you know, worth preserving. So in recent years, debates have also come up around like, you know, the national security law and integration with mainland China have also highlighted how some people feel that these core values have come under threat, have come under attack, which has sparked, you know, some nostalgia or maybe even resistance that's tied to our colonial past.
I also had a follow-up question to that because you said that Hong Kong is now more unique. But my question is, would you say that Hong Kong has lost its unique economic identity and become just another Chinese city with a stock market?
That is a really important question. First, I'd say that Hong Kong's kind of uniqueness hasn't disappeared overnight, but, you know, the landscape is definitely changing over the recent decades. Um, for for a long time, for years, Hong Kong was Asia's, you know, first international financial center. It's known as the bridge between East and West. And right now, our stock market is renowned for its transparency, you know, international participation, and kind of a regulatory environment based on English common law. So in 2010s, at its peak, Hong Kong Stock Exchange often ranked around among the top three globally for, you know, IPO fundraising, even surpassing, you know, New York and London in some years. But in more recent years, things have kind of changed. So, for example, the political environment, the 2019 protests and the implementation of the national security law in 2020 had a pretty noticeable impact, as well as the stock market trends. So, for example, the Hang Seng Index, the city's like primary stock index, has underperformed compared to global peers. In 2023, for example, I think it dropped by about like 15 to 20%, while the S&P 500 in the US gained over 24%. So this shows that foreign investment flows have slowed, and some overseas firms have relocated, you know, regional headquarters to other countries or other cities like, you know, Singapore, which is now challenging Hong Kong's status as Asia's top financial center, because it's also one of the four Asian tigers. And mainland Chinese firms now make up a large chunk of the Hong Kong stock market's capitalization. I think it's around 80 to 90% today compared to just 10% in like the 1990s, which also reflects Hong Kong's increasing integration with the mainland. but also, kind of draws questions and concerns about, market diversity and independence. So the question was, is Hong Kong just another Chinese city now with its stock market and all other aspects? I'd say that not yet, but the gap certainly is narrowing in the recent years because Hong Kong still has its unique features. Like again, like I've said, the rule of law, the lifestyle and the global links, and the global financial access. But the challenges are still really tangible and real. There's for example, there's been an ongoing like outflow of local and international talent, like which is known as a term called brain drain. And some investors are also worried and concerned about political risks and lack of clarity about Hong Kong's future autonomy. So as for its unique identity, it hasn't disappeared, but it's under pressure, and its distinctiveness is definitely less pronounced than before, especially in finance.
On top of
Yeah.
that, with
Oh yeah. Sorry. Go.
oh sorry, Shahzaib. On top of that, with China's tightening grip, would you say that Hong Kong could possibly become irrelevant in the next 20 years, overtaken by Singapore or even Shanghai?
That's a pretty pressing and relevant concern, and honestly, it's a question that's been on the minds of, I think, every every Hong Konger or like every investor. And I think there's definitely no denying that, Beijing and China's influence over Hong Kong has grown significantly, especially since, again, the national security laws. And this has changed a lot of perceptions about Hong Kong's like autonomy, legal system, and openness. For example, in the past few years, we've seen political uncertainty from increased government scrutiny and as well as regulatory changes because there's been more alignment with mainland practices from education to financial oversight. Meanwhile, for example, other countries or cities like Singapore has positioned themselves pretty aggressively as a stable and business-friendly alternative. So just for some evidence, Singapore has several multinational firms and banks like JP Morgan and as well as others, and they have shifted regional headquarters or key staff to Singapore. And in 2023, I think Singapore's stock exchange saw a rise in listings and trading activities, while Hong Kong's market like slowed down significantly, and it's the lowest it's ever been in a decade. But in terms of whether Hong Kong is becoming irrelevant, I think it's too early to write Hong Kong off and to, disregard it because Hong Kong, when you think about it, is still the gateway for global investors to access China's market. The stock and bond connects, for example, channel billions of dollars in investment between mainland China and the world using Hong Kong as this bridge. So Singapore simply doesn't have that direct access. Another example, for Hong Kong's financial markets are still much larger than Singapore's. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange right now is among the largest, and its foreign exchange and derivative markets are also highly liquid. And the last thing I'd like to mention is, despite pressure, Hong Kong still maintains common law courts, which are more familiar to international investors than the systems in mainland China. So when we look at the big picture, in the short term, Singapore is definitely gaining ground. And, for especially like some Western firms, Singapore does provide a more predictable environment, I'd say. The city-state is now sometimes called Asia's Switzerland for its stability and neutrality. But in the long term, Hong Kong's fate depends on how much autonomy it retains, and that connects to its integration with China, as we've mentioned before, and whether it can continue to offer something different from mainland cities, which it continues to do right now. So if the political and legal environment continues to converge with the mainland, Hong Kong's unique value proposition could erode, and Singapore could overtake it as Asia's top financial hub, but it's definitely not it's far from irrelevant yet, and its future largely depends on how it manages its relationship with the mainland and whether it can maintain its unique traits, which are openness, legal clarity, and international trust that made it successful in the first place.
Thank you, Sam, for that very insightful response. Shahzaib, I believe that your hand was raised. Mr. Shahzaib Karim, are you able to hear us?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't unmute. But
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
yeah, so I think I would agree with Sam and adding on to her. So to answer your super, I'd say that my answer is like no, Hong Kong is unlikely to become irrelevant, but I'd say that it'll become like less central and it'll be like more replaceable because like if you look at the rising competitions, like Singapore is eating into Hong Kong's financial dominance with greater political stability and strong global ties, and Shanghai and Shenzhen are being aggressively developed as China's preferred financial centers. And if we also see that like brain drain is also a huge factor because more than I think there was a statistic saying that more than 200,000 residents have emigrated since 2020, including top finance, tech, and education talents. And declining human capital, of course, it weakens innovation and entrepreneurship in the country. And like, but I think that Hong Kong will still matter because unlike mainland China, money flows in and out freely, and this is crucial for investors. And despite mainland cities growing fast, foreign firms still prefer Hong Kong as a testing ground before entering China properly. So I'd say that Hong Kong may no longer be indispensable, but it's not irrelevant either. It's shifting from being the jewel of Asia's free market frontier to like being more of a strategic financial outpost of China. And I'd say that the transition may reduce its like global cloud, I guess, but as long as it maintains its financial openness, legal credibility, and geographic advantage as well, I'd say it will still play a significant role, but just not the same one as it used to.
Thank you, Shazib. I would unequivocally agree with what you said, and thank you, Sam and Supreet, for that very insightful responses. So, moving on to the next segment, which I think Sam brought up, the comparison between Hong Kong and Singapore, and this is often what economists do. Economists often talk about, and this is also very important. So, for the viewers, the debate between Hong Kong and Singapore is often that, as I've mentioned, comes up not only in an economic setting but also in like boardrooms or even among the people. Hong Kong versus Singapore, two city states, both former sort of British colonies, both financial giants, but beneath the surface they play very different games. So let's start with the basics. So as of 2024, Hong Kong's population is more than 7 million, while Singapore comes in just behind at 6 million. Both are densely populated, but Singapore has more room to expand with an aggressive land reclamation strategy and one of the most efficient urban planning systems in the world, which actually read about while in Singapore. And land area wise, Hong Kong spans, if I'm not mistaken, over 1,000 square kilometers. But the problem with that is about 75% of that is underdeveloped due to mountainous terrain. Singapore stands at around 700 square kilometers, which sort of makes it far more of its land like which sort of makes it land more unusable compared to Hong Kong. Economically, Hong Kong's economy is dominated by finance, real estate, and trade. So as of 2023, financial services alone accounted for, I think, one fifth of the GDP. In contrast, Singapore has sort of a diversified model. Finance still matters, but so do biotech, petrochemicals, electronics manufacturing, and recently green tech. So Singapore's manufacturing sector contributes a bit more than one fifth of its GDP, like around 22%, but compared to just under like 1% in Hong Kong. And what's interesting is the taxation and business climate in these two cities. Both cities are famously business friendly, but Singapore is often ranked slightly higher. So in 2024, according to a World Bank Ease of Doing Business, Singapore ranked number two, while Hong Kong was number four. And corporate tax rates in Singapore are just 17% compared to Hong Kong's 16.5%. But Singapore often offers more tax incentives in tech and R&D. Another interesting factor is the ports factor. So Hong Kong was one of the king of ports. In 2004, it handled 22.6 million TEUs, second to only Singapore. But that dominance has sort of slipped from there. In 2023, so moving forward 2 decades, Hong Kong processed around 17 million TEUs, while Singapore handled a staggering 39 million TEUs, which sort of makes it the second busiest port in the world after like sort of Shanghai. And one of the most important factors while looking at a country is housing, education, governance, and like other socio-economic factors. So housing wise, Hong Kong ranks among the world's most expensive housing market, and I think that goes without saying. With like a median apartment prices over 20 times the median household incomes. Singapore, while still pricey, maintains tighter government intervention. So government housing is far more common, and over 60%, oh no, over 80% of Singaporeans live in government-built HDB flats, which are like heavily subsidized and planned. And education-wise, Singapore invests heavily in education and R&D. It spends over 2% of its GDP on research compared to less than 1% in Hong Kong. As a result, Singapore consistently outperforms in global innovation rankings and is positioning itself as a hub for AI, fintech, and sustainability startups. And governance-wise, Singapore's centralized technocratic government gives it a clear long-term planning edge. Every major infrastructure project, from like ports to even parks, is folded into a 10 to 50-year vision. Hong Kong, under the one country, two systems model, operates with less long-term certainty, especially in recent years. And we'll get into the politics in like the next segment. So the question is who wins, and it sort of depends on the question. So if you're like measuring openness to capital market, I think Hong Kong still offers unmatched access to China, which is better for investors. But if you're betting on like long-term innovation, infrastructure, or like livability, Singapore may be a safer bet. But I don't know, maybe that's the wrong question altogether. The two cities aren't clones, they're complements of each other, rather, I think. One thrives on flexibility while the other on foresight, and one sort of bridges east and west while the other builds its own path forward. So, with that being said, I would like to ask Sam a question. So, someone from Hong Kong, would you like someone living in Hong Kong? Would you say you vision yourself living there in the future with like rising like household prices, and like with the apartment prices being so expensive, and like everything in Hong Kong being sort of so expensive? Would you envision like yourself still living there in the future, or would you envision sort of the living abroad, which is another brain drain problem that you mentioned in Hong Kong?
Honestly, as I'm from Hong Kong, and I have a pretty complicated relationship with the idea of living there, long term, especially with, as you said, the increases in housing prices. And like just to draw back on what you mentioned before, Hong Kong's housing prices are among the highest in the world. So according to Demographia survey, which I've done a bit of research on, Hong Kong is ranked as the world's least affordable city for home ownership for more than a decade. And as you've also mentioned, the median home price is over 18 to 20 times the median household income. So for context, in cities like London or New York, the ratio is around 7 to 8, but Hong Kong, it's around 14.4. So this reality shapes the mindset of many, and I would say pretty much all of young Hong Kongers. So many people in their 20s and 30s end up living with their parents far longer than they would like, simply because independent living is like so out of reach. And just to add on to that, renting is also expensive and often means compromising on space and quality of life. And public housing waiting lists can stretch on for years, sometimes up to, even a decade. And personally, all of these factors adding up makes it very hard for me to envision a future in Hong Kong. Like, so obviously, still I love the city, I love its energy, culture, and the sense of home, but the financial pressure of housing is very overwhelming, and it feels like you'd be working your whole life just to pay off a mortgage for a very small space. To add on to that, and just to add on to this, I also know a lot of friends who share this sentiment, and some are seriously considering moving abroad, especially to places like, the UK, Canada, or even Australia. Like, not just for career opportunities or political reasons, but, simply just to have a shot at a better quality of life and a more, achievable one. So, to answer your question directly, I wouldn't really envision myself settling in Hong Kong in the future, mainly because of the housing market. But, there's other reasons as well, such as the climate and, all that stuff.
Thank you, Sam, for the very insightful response. And I see that Mr. Supreet Nagella, your hand is raised. Would you like to add something?
No, not really. Shahzaib, I see your hand is raised.
I mean, okay, so, just adding on, I think like talking about like the future of the country, I'd say in the future, I envision it to be like that the Chinese central government will likely tighten its grip further because there'd be more pro Beijing education policies, more laws aligning with mainland standards, and also stronger digital and political surveillance. And my prediction is that Hong Kong will resemble a controlled financial zone with freedoms tolerated only as long as they don't challenge central authority. And also, with the economic future, I think Hong Kong will still remain like a financial hub, but less globally central, as I also mentioned before. I'd say that, as mentioned before, it'd be still attractive. It be like very attractive to mainland firms and investors, but it'd be less appealing to Western companies who are wary of the Chinese influence. And probably Singapore, Shanghai, and Tokyo will continue to chip away at Hong Kong's dominance. And Hong Kong will probably transition from Asia's international finance capital to China's international finance arm. But I'd say overall in the future, it'd still remain economically active and globally connected, but increasingly shaped by political, legal, and ideological systems of mainland China. And its uniqueness will fade, but its strategic value will persist, just in a different form, I think.
Thank you, Shahzaib. I would wholeheartedly agree with what you said. And yeah, just adding on, I think like what Sam brought up, like Hong Kong's unaffordable. Oh, Mr. Supreet Nagala, your hand is raised. Would you like to chime in?
Would you like to finish first, or should I give my
Yeah,
thoughts?
continue. Yeah, you can continue first.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so first of all, we know that Singapore is completely neutral, sovereign, and smartly aligned with both the East and West. And as Shahzeb already mentioned, if Beijing continues to tighten its grip, Hong Kong may just become another city in the Greater Bay Area controlled by China. But if China opens up, and then Hong Kong could rebound as the ultimate financial bridge to the world. Next, we have talent and innovation. In 2045, Singapore is building AI cities, biotech valleys, and climate proof infrastructure. Its English first, globally connected education system will still attract Nobel level researchers, tech founders, and digital nomads. Hong Kong, it does have the finance muscle, but the brain drain, like Ari mentioned, will continue until political freedoms return. And if creativity is stifled, innovation will stall. And that's just the truth. Then we have capital flows. By 2045, Hong Kong could dominate the RMB denominated asset market, acting as China's digital yuan powerhouse. And it could also be at the top if China's financial system liberalizes, but that's a big if. Meanwhile, Singapore is quietly becoming the capital haven of the world, from family offices to green bonds to decentralized finance. It's trusted, transparent, and still in control of its own currency. So overall, the verdict is Hong Kong will still be a major economic powerhouse compared to the rest of the world, but it will start losing its dominance gradually, to China's Shanghai, Taiwan, as well as Singapore, of course.
Thank you, Supreet, for that political insight, and we'll get there soon. So yeah, as I was mentioning before, one of the main reasons for the youth brain drain in Hong Kong is due to the unaffordable housing market, and it's one of the world's most unaffordable housing markets. So like the median home price, as I mentioned, was over 20 times the median annual household income. For a context, a wealthy housing market usually sits around 3 to 5 times in places like New York. So clearly, Hong Kong is like over the moon when it comes to like housing, and renting isn't much easier as well because according to like surveys and like credible news organizations, a single bedroom apartment in like central district like Causeway Bay or like Shongwan can cost up to like 20,000 or like 25,000 Hong Kong dollars, and that's like around 3,000 US dollars. So even if you move further out, say to like Songwon or Yonglong, you're still looking at over 10,000 plus Hong Kong dollars, often for cramped subdivided units. This often leads to a phenomenon known as cage homes in Hong Kong. So while I was at Singapore, I met students from like the Hong Kong International School, and they actually shed light on this, that Hong Kong is particularly known for cage homes because of the unaffordable housing market. And I think economically it just goes on to show like the free market is not sort of doing its job in terms of resource allocation. And one of the things that Hong Kong government can probably do is intervene in the housing market, as clearly there is a negative externality, as there is an there's like a over consumption of housing properties, but like not enough people can like sort of obtain it. So it leads to like sort of people having a shortage and way too many, way higher prices. So government intervention is something that I would think is needed, especially to like prevail this cage homes or like Gano flats apartment in Hong Kong. And so what do people do there? So based on my like interaction and like talking with Sam as well, like they adapt, they share their budget, they compromise. And like late night cafes are sort of like becoming like co-working spaces nowadays, and like long commutes are also very normal. But ambition becomes kind of a currency, just like cash in a way. So it's not all pressure, but there's like beauty in the rhythm too. So you'll find like university students studying with sea views in like Kennedy Town, for example, or like freelancers typing away at cafes in Mongkok. So side hustles are basically everywhere, like tutoring, trading sneakers, or like selling vintage fashion on like Carousel. So like the gig economy, as economists call it, is very high in Hong Kong. It's like 12% of the Hong Kong's labor force. So it just goes on to show like the city's moving fast, and if you can keep up, you might just curve out a future. Still, it's like very heavy pressure environment. So there's definitely tension. And the promise of Hong Kong, high salaries, international opportunity, and merit-based mobility feels harder to grasp than it did in past decades. So like in surveys conducted by like the Hong Kong University in 2023, over 41% of young residents said they were considering emigration, which is essentially brain drains. And the main reason they cited it was basically the quality of life and housing. But those who say stay in Hong Kong, they're often betting on something deeper than money. So it's still about the question of identity and like nationalism. So based on that, I'd like to move on to the next segment of the podcast, which is what's next for Hong Kong, focusing on the Greater Bay Area, as well as like the political scene, as well as the political scene as well. So for some context, Hong Kong has always uh, been one of movement, not just economically but politically and socially. And the question is no longer can Hong Kong just compete. It can Hong Kong redefine itself again. So let's talk about the Greater Bay Area, or GBA, which is a strategic plan launched by the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, to integrate 11 cities, Hong Kong, Macau, and 9 cities in mainland China, including Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Zhuhai. And together, this region has a combined GDP of over $1.9 trillion, nearly matching South Korea. And it's home to 86 million people. And the goal is simple: create world-class economic and innovation hub. China's answer to Silicon Valley meets the San Francisco Bay Area. So for Hong Kong, the GBA could be both a lifeline and a test. On one hand, it promises new jobs, cross-border investment, and greater access to China's vast consumer base. On the other hand, it's a shift from autonomy to integration, sort of. So here's what it sort of looks like in real terms. So, like for example, the Shenzhen Zhongshan Bridge and the high-speed rail are cutting travel time between cities down to minutes. Hong Kong residents can now apply for GBA residence permits, easing access to mainland social services and education. Technological collaboration is ramping up. Hong Kong science parks are now linked with Shenzhen's hardware supply chains. And in 2023 alone, over 18,000 Hong Kong startups registered GBA branches with fintech, biotech, and green tech leading the charge. But this transition doesn't come without friction. Politically, the one country, two systems framework, which was meant to last until 2047, has come under strain. The national security law introduced in 2020 redefined the boundaries of dissent, speech, and protest. Since then, over 100 civil society groups have disbanded, and the political climate has grown more cautious. This has real economic effects. The number of foreign journalists stationed in Hong Kong has dropped by over 40% since 2020. Several multinational firms, particularly in media, law, and tech, have moved regional headquarters to Singapore. And according to like a Bloomberg survey, roughly 30% of international investors say that they're less confident about Hong Kong's legal transparency compared to mere 5 years ago. So basically, the main question that arises at this point is Hong Kong's autonomy and sort of the dissent when it comes to free speech. And in Dollar Dialogue, we of course endorse free speech. So based on that, the question of free speech and living in Hong Kong under the national security law, that's something that is particularly interesting, not just for the residents of Hong Kong themselves, but also for international investors, as it's seen in a particularly negative light. So my question to Sam would be, as someone living in Hong Kong, would you say you have experienced those scrutiny regarding national security law, like in real life?
Interesting question. Well, that's a really important and sensitive question. Personally, I haven't been directly targeted or scrutinized under the national security law, but its presence has for sure changed the atmosphere in Hong Kong, and I felt those changes in my everyday life. So, personally, what I've experienced is first of all, self censorship in conversations. Before 2020, I think people were generally more open about their political opinions, even in public spaces or online. Now I notice that friends, and family are much more cautious, choosing their words carefully or, avoiding certain sensitive topics, especially, anything related to protests or government criticism. And even in private group chats, there's like a sense of, better safe than sorry. As for social media habits, some friends have deleted, old social media posts or kind of moved discussions to more private messaging apps. And personally, I thought twice about posting or commenting anything that could be seen as sensitive. And um, lastly, as for public events and gatherings, there's generally much less willingness to attend public forums. I remember there was like a time in the past. There was a time in the past when young Hong Kongers, they could join a rally and feel like it was a normal part of civic life. But since the national security law's introduction, um, many of those young Hong Kongers, many of those young Hong Kongers have since opted out simply to avoid any potential troubles. So for me, I haven't had any direct scrutiny, but there's definitely a feeling of a new atmosphere and a new vibe in Hong Kong. And yeah, I haven't been questioned by authorities, and I don't know anyone who has personally experienced any of that stuff. But the effect is definitely there. People are more careful, more private, and sometimes anxious about crossing what they say invisible lines.
Thank you, Sam, for that very personal anecdote. And I see that Mr. Shahzaib Karim, you have your hand raised. Would you like to add something regarding the political atmosphere, censorship, or even the political implications of Hong Kong, or even the national security law?
Yeah, so sure. So to talk about the political scene, I think like after the 2019 to 2020 protests, Hong Kong's political landscape has undergone a dramatic transformation, and we can see that a lot has already changed. For example, the national security law, because that redefined what is legal political expression, and also the electoral overhaul in 2021, because only patriots may govern, wiping out pro democracy votes. And I think that the current reality is that politics is stable but not open, and like the most major decisions are guided by Beijing, not the Hong Kong Legislative Council itself. And I think in the future there are a few risks going forward. For example, the widening gap between citizens' identities and government policies, and also ongoing self censorship in education, academia, and journalism. And I think that we can also expect continued political quiet enforced by the system, which was not chosen by the people, of course. And I think there's also going to be dissent, which will go digital or go abroad, but civic activism won't disappear. I think it'll just evolve.
Thank you, Shazia, for that very insightful response. And yeah, I would unequivocally agree with what you said. So, as mentioned before, the June 2020 Beijing imposed a national security law in Hong Kong, and for viewers, it basically criminalized acts of secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. But the language was vague enough to cast a wide net. So within months, over 100 pro-democracy activists, journalists, and politicians were arrested. Major media outlets like Apple Daily and Stand News were shut down. More than 50 civil society organizations, including student unions and legal aid, were disbanded out of fear. Bookstores quietly removed titles on democracy, Tiananmen, and political theory. And the chilling effect didn't stop there. Censorship has surged. According to Hong Kong Journalists Association, over 60% of local reporters say they now avoid sensitive topics. University syllabi have been quietly rewritten. Teachers have lost jobs for discussing the umbrella movement. Even films now undergo vetting. Under a 2021 film censorship law, any content deemed to endanger national security can be banned outright. So why does this matter economically? Because censorship doesn't just restrict freedom; it restricts confidence. In a global economy which is sort of built on information, talent, and trust, perception is currency. So as a result of the sort of censorship, foreign direct investment in Hong Kong fell from $104 billion in 2019 to $67 billion in 2022. International schools have reported a drop in enrollment by 15 to 20% as expat families relocate to Singapore or Tokyo. The number of international journalists stationed in Hong Kong has decreased by over 40% since 2020. In tech, several regional data firms and fintech startups have shifted their HQs to Singapore, citing regulatory clarity and freedom of research as key reasons. And for youth, the effects are sort of existential. According to a 2023 poll by Chinese University of Hong Kong, 48% of respondents under 35 said they were effectively considering immigration, and their top concern was other than housing and like sort of the affordability, freedom of expression, career mobility, and political climate. So, in a city which was once sort of praised for being Asia's window to the world, that window is now half closed. Still, this is key because censorship has not killed ambition though. It has sort of reshaped it. Startups are now adapting to avoiding red lines. Artists are turning to metaphor and memory, and educators are finding coded ways to teach critical thinking without raising alarms. So I would say Hong Kong story is sort of being rewritten in real time, and like always, it's happening at the fault line between resilience and sort of repression, if that's even accurate. And the city may longer be the freest in Asia, and that's according to international news organizations. But like talking to Sam and like other people from Hong Kong, I'm not really sure if the censorship is really that prominent, as many people living in Hong Kong don't really have that appeal of censorship or even repression, and they just feel like they're living their life normally. So this might sort of be overstated by Western media, or even media in like the East, but like it's not really like set in stone, for instance. So and it's very multifaceted. So clearly there needs to be nuance to understand this, and like I think we have reached a common ground that Hong Kong's censorship is not that overstated. So I see Mr. Supreeth Nagella, your hand is raised. Would you like to talk about Hong Kong's stamp duty?
Yes, I would. And you guys haven't talked about this yet, right?
Correct. We haven't talked about it.
Cool. Okay, so Hong Kong imposes some of the highest stamp duties on property purchases in the world, especially targeting non resident buyers and speculators. This law was introduced to cool down the property market and curb speculation, but it also had some unexpected economic ripple effects. Because let's first understand how it works. Depending on the property price and buyer status, resident, non resident, or corporate entity, the stamp duty can reach up to 15% of the property value. For example, foreign buyers or companies buying residential property pay the highest rates. And this tax has a very great economic impact because it makes Hong Kong's already insanely expensive housing market even more prohibitive for many investors and residents. It also encourages some buyers to create complex corporate structures or trusts to just try to avoid the duty. And which fuels a shadow market of shell companies. It has also pushed certain real estate investment activities into offshore vehicles or neighboring markets like Shenzhen, affecting capital flow into Hong Kong. The government's revenue from stamp duty forms a significant part of its income too, which makes Hong Kong one of the few places that funds itself uh, largely without income tax, relying heavily on land sales and duties. And what's even crazier is that despite this high tax, property prices keep on climbing, partly because the government controls land supply tightly, which creates artificial scarcity. The duty also sometimes discourages genuine home buyers, like residents who want to buy homes for to live in, and this ironically favors wealthy speculators who can afford the tax. It's a huge factor which also has contributed to the brain drain, like Arib and Shahzaib have already mentioned. Wait, I also wanted to ask you, Ling, you Wang, do you personally feel that housing has gotten very expensive, and like you own property in Hong Kong right now, and like how is it personally?
Yes, personally, in my opinion, housing in Hong Kong has gotten extremely expensive over the years. And honestly, it's one of the biggest issues and worries. It's one of the biggest issues that people face here. The city, again, consistently ranks at the top of global lists. But, despite that, I was fortunate. My family and I were fortunate enough to kind of buy our own property. But I have to say that it wasn't easy at all. The process required, years of saving, a lot of financial planning, and, frankly, some compromises in terms of location and size. But, because even a small flat here comes with a huge price tag and a pretty long mortgage. But, I would consider myself lucky because I know many people in Hong Kong to are struggling to, even get a foot on this property ladder. And especially for many young people and families, home ownership feels out of reach unless they have, significant family support or are willing to move much further away from the city center. So yes, did my family and we did buy our own place, but it came with sacrifices, and I completely understand why housing affordability is such a big concern for people here in Hong Kong.
Thank you everyone for the discussion, and I would wholeheartedly agree with the stated facts. So moving on, for the last segment of the podcast, I would like to talk about the human currency, why Hong Kong still matters. So by now, the viewers should have heard about the data. You have seen the skyline in your mind. You have sort of felt the contradictions. But Hong Kong is expensive, but people still stay there. It's politically tense, but creativity still persists there. It's shrinking in freedom, but it's sort of growing in ambition. So the question is sort of why. And personally, I think the question arises because even despite its challenges, many people who live in Hong Kong, like still like not considering the youth, they still want to like live there despite like its challenges. And I think the main reason is like it's not GDP, but I think rather it's trust in each other. Because we might ask, why do young professionals still chase opportunity here when housing is unaffordable and headlines are so sort of like censored? Or even why do families build futures in like 300 square foot flats with no balconies but like city views? And why do artists and like coders sort of call Hong Kong home? And yeah, ultimately I think it comes to trust in the system and in each other. You see it in the way people navigate uncertainty like it's part of the commute, like in how students run pop-up bookstores with like banned titles, or like in the or like even like street vendors on like Temple Street who've been there since like the 80s, raising prices by 50 cents every 5 years, still knowing your order by heart. So I think that's the real human currency of Hong Kong. And many economists are still, it's sort of a new thing, the human currency, but economists are still very much considering this qualitative factor when looking at country's economy. And Hong Kong's human currency I think is very strong personally, because people have trust in the system and in each other. So it's very gritty in the sense, it's relentless belief that even if the rules change, they sort of don't give up in the game. And I do think it's more than just nostalgia. It's about a city which sort of redefines value from like the skyscrapers to the street corners. Because at the end of the day, Hong Kong isn't just a financial hub or like sort of a geopolitical chess piece. It's a place where people sort of make rent, make deals, make noise, and somehow sort of make it work. So my question to Sam or like Shazib or Supreet, you can also chime in. Why in the future? What do you think the future holds for Hong Kong? Do you think the sort of human currency will still persist, or do you think it's not gonna persist? Or do you have any other like sort of opinions in mind as to what the future might hold for Hong Kong?
That is a really important question and very big right now. Um, on the topic of the future of Hong Kong, we have to think about where it's at right now. And currently, Hong Kong is at a crossroads, as we've discussed before. Its identity as this global financial center and an international city is currently being challenged by political, economic, and these social changes. For example, integration with the Greater Bay Area and mainland China brings both opportunities, for example, access to a bigger market, but also challenges, especially, regarding autonomy and freedom. And I think that Hong Kong will continue to evolve. It's always been adaptable, and its people are incredibly resilient. But the future will largely depend on how it balances integration again with the mainland, with its own characteristics, and if it can maintain these advantages and stay relevant on the world stage.
Yeah, and I think to add on, I'd say that um, I think the human currency will persist because Hong Kong is still a hub for finance, law, logistics, and tech sectors that rely on human capital, and it still remains a top city for asset management and fintech. And also, Mandarin speaking professionals can still leverage Hong Kong to work globally. And also, not only that, Hong Kongers are globally educated, multilingual, and also culturally agile as well, which is like irreplaceable in China's push to globalize. And the global mindset is still in demand across the Greater Bay Area. So I think that yes. Yes, it will. Like human currency will still persist. Hong Kong will still need, attract, and rely on smart, skilled people. But the value of human currency may have become conditional on alignment, not just ability.
Mr. Supreet Nagal, I see that your hand is raised.
Yes. Okay. So, as we were talking about Hong Kong's human currency, we also know that the people in it is what makes it thrive. So, Hong Kong's skilled workforce, bilingual talent, and entrepreneurial spirit are key drivers of its success as a global business hub. And in 2006, the Quality Migrant Admission Scheme was launched. And this is a positive immigration policy designed to attract highly skilled or talented individuals from around the world to live and work in Hong Kong without first needing a job offer. So it aimed to boost Hong Kong's competitiveness by enriching its talent pool in key sectors like finance, technology, and innovation. So, how does this law support Hong Kong's economy? It was sort of a talent magnet because it opened the doors to innovators, entrepreneurs, and professionals. And this obviously would bring in creativity and fresh ideas. And with economic diversification, by attracting a non Chinese global talent, it also helped Hong Kong reduce over reliance on any one market and fostered a more diverse and resilient economy. And QMAS participants often serve as bridges between Hong Kong and their home countries by expanding trade, investment, and cultural exchange. So, why is this important? I feel this is very important because even though Hong Kong has a few political uncertainties, its commitment to attracting global talent through policies like the QMAS demonstrates a clear economic strategy, and they know that investing in human capital is the foundation for future growth. So, I wanted to ask a question. My question was, in your experience, have you met a diverse group of people? Like, is Hong Kong as diverse as it is on paper? Like, when you walk on the streets, do you see people from many different countries working there? And given all the changes happening, do you personally feel, because I feel you are obviously highly educated because I've heard about your summer program, and I feel uh, I feel that you're also a highly skilled worker. So, wouldn't you feel it's better to stay in Hong Kong because that's what many other people are doing by coming to Hong Kong?
Thank you so much for the question and the praise. On paper, Hong Kong is described as a diverse and international city, as we all know, with people from all over the world living and working here, and as well as a long history as a global hub. But in my experience, the reality on the streets can feel a bit different. If you walk around most neighborhoods, the majority of people are ethnically Chinese, and local culture is very dominant. There are certain districts like Central, Soho, Tsim Sha Tsui, or Sai Ying Pun, where you'll see a lot of expats and hear different languages. But outside of those areas, it's much more local. So while you do encounter other communities such as Filipino, Indonesian, South Asian, and as well as Western expats, their presence is often more visible in specific sectors like the domestic helpers or finance professionals, or on Sundays in certain gathering spots. So a lot of people, especially locals, have mostly local friends. They attend local schools and speak mainly Cantonese. And expats and international students often stick together. And there is some mingling, but it's not as integrated as, I'd say like cities like London, Toronto, or, New York. So does this diversity make me want to stay in Hong Kong? Personally, I do appreciate the international flavor when you're in the right parts of town. Being able to eat food from all around the world, hearing different languages, meeting people with different backgrounds. It's for sure one of Hong Kong's strengths. But I wouldn't say that diversity alone is enough reason to stay for me. Um, for me, other factors such as career opportunities and personal connections, as well as where I want to study in the future, matter just as much or more than um, what we're talking about here. And also, as Hong Kong has changed in recent years, some of the international feel has kind of faded with fewer expats, and some international businesses are also leaving Hong Kong. So while I value this diversity that definitely exists and has a quite a big presence in the city. It's not as deep or integrated as some other global cities, and I wouldn't say it's the single biggest reason to stay, personally.
Thank you, Sam, for that very personal anecdote. And like, like on the topic of autonomy and like what the future of Hong Kong holds, we brought a specialist, Mr. Rishan Ali, who is actually currently studying at Charterhouse in England, and he's like a Duke of Edinburgh Award recipient, and he's also very intellectual when it comes to Chinese history, when it comes to Chinese education, and also when it comes to Chinese culture. And he was on a flight, which is why he wasn't able to join. But Mr. Rishan Ali, for like the remaining few minutes of the podcast, is there any questions or like any comments you would like to make?
Thank you for that great introduction, Arib. Unfortunately, I've missed most of it, but if it has not been covered before, I'd like to ask a question.
Oh wait, Rishan, will you please fix your microphone? We can't really understand what you're saying.
Oh, my bad. 1 second. Oh, is it better now?
Yeah, we
Uh,
can
yeah.
hear you.
All right. So, yeah, thank you, Arib, for the introduction. I think my question was on the cost of living crisis in Hong Kong. The price of like the cost of rent has been going up, and it has not been properly dealt with, I think. So, what do you think can be done to combat the cost of living in Hong Kong, which is a very densely packed area? And how do you think that will affect the attractiveness of Hong Kong being a place where you can settle down and live a stable life?
Thank you for the question. Um, High living prices, especially for housing, are a huge challenge, and it's something that everyone feels here. So I believe that while there's no quick fix, there are several things that the government can do to help make life more affordable, and some of those include um, the most obvious one is increasing land and housing supply. So the biggest factor behind high housing prices is the limited supply of land and homes combined with high demand. So the government could speed up land development, um, build more public or subsidized housing, my bad, or streamline approval processes. Cut the red tape for new housing projects so they can be built faster. And actually, that's something that the government is, actually working on right now. For example, let me pull this up. Yeah, for example, the government is putting the chief executive John Lee has pledged to build 30,000 larger, more affordable transitional homes over the next 5 years, and to cap the waiting time for public housing at 6 years. There are also two massive development projects in the works. The first one is the $100 billion Hong Kong dollar Northern Metropolis project, which aims to house 2.5 million people in the Northern New Territories. And another project is called Lantau Tomorrow, which is a 624 billion Hong Kong dollar land reclamation plan off Lantau Island. But both projects right now are currently facing significant hurdles, including legal, technical, and environmental. And as public policy experts point out, the only real solution is to build more public housing. And although progress has been slow, for many years, supply simply hasn't kept up with demand. Another solution I feel like could be to regulate the property market to curb certain speculations and reduce price volatility. My bad. The government, for example, could impose maybe higher taxes on vacant properties or speculative buying, and promote transparency in the property market to prevent price manipulation. And the last thing is to improve income and social support, because addressing living costs isn't just about lowering prices. It's also about helping people cope, helping the people that are in need. So how this can be done is by raising minimum wage and reviewing it regularly to keep up with inflation, as well as strengthening social safety nets for low income families, because housing inequality and income inequality is another big issue that Hong Kong currently faces. So, in short, combating these high living prices in Hong Kong requires definitely, I would say, a combination of building more homes, regulating the market, and supporting people's incomes, as well as, rethinking how the city's economy is structured. And it's definitely a complex problem, but I feel like with consistent and determined policies and long term planning, it's not impossible to make life more affordable for everyone. I feel like Hong Kong is on the right track to do that.
Thank you so much, Sam, for that insightful response, and thank you, Rishan Ali, for briefly joining and asking that question as well. So I think we should wrap up the podcast for today. And one concluding fact that I would briefly like to mention is that for the viewer specifically, Hong Kong is more than just a skyline or a stock market, or more than just a symbol. I think it's a city that is suspended between the world's east and west, sort of freedom and control, legacy and reinvention, and sort of freedom and sort of censorship. And yet, despite all that tension, it sort of keeps moving. So even though the dichotomy is still there, Hong Kong is still persisting. And I think even though the path is somewhat clear, the future is still very promising for Hong Kong. So in a world which is sort of chasing growth, Hong Kong as a country is reminding us that resilience is its own currency. So I would like to thank Sam for coming on the podcast today. You were very insightful, and I personally enjoyed our discussions very much. So Sam, is there any final words that you would like to say, or like anything about the podcast before we depart for today?
Yeah, again, thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. I feel like it's been a fantastic experience discussing, Hong Kong's journey, becoming a global financial hub, the unique challenges around housing, and, its evolving role within the Greater Bay Area and, the global economy. I've learned a lot. I've truly learned a lot from this conversation, and I appreciate the insights shared by everyone. Yeah, thanks again for letting me be part of this discussion. This podcast is amazing.
Thank you, Sam, for the amazing work. So, viewers, thanks for joining me on Dollar Dialogue this episode, which was episode 53. Episode 53 from British port to finance, financial powerhouse, Hong Kong's economic tug of war with Ling Yu Wang or Sam. And until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and I would also say keep questioning the world around you. So, keep listening to Dollar Dialogue as we change economics one dialogue at a time. So that's all for today. And yeah, goodbye for now.